As a Magic the Gathering YouTuber, I am contractually obligated to discuss the Commander format regularly, or else Sheldon Menery will break my fingers. I play Commander a lot, and despite Gavin's attempts, it remains one of my favorite formats, and I own plenty of not enough decks for the format. One of the decks that I own is commanded by Teysa. No, not that Teysa. No, not that Teysa. That Teysa. Teysa Karlov, aka Dami Mommy, is one of my favorite commanders, and of the decks I own, this one has the highest win percentage. And it's not because it's overpowered or uses the best cards. No, Teysa Karlov is just a value factory, pumping out advantage after advantage. Teysa's double Ds double up all of your death triggers. Your creature makes a token when it dies, now there's 2. Gain 2 life, draw 2 cards. Honestly, this deck's theme song should be Double Vision, because Teysa's making me feel down and dirty. You see this effect right here? I often forget it even exists. And not just because my eyes are somewhere else. It just so rarely comes into play, even in a deck full to the brim with tokens. The death doubling is just that powerful. Let's talk about what makes this deck work, and to do that, I need to talk about that thing Teysa cares so much about. Death triggers. There are 2 kinds of death triggers: creatures that do a thing when they die, and cards that care about when your creatures die. Let's talk about the first category. And we can't talk about creatures that do a thing when they die without talking about the original suicidal robot, Solemn Simulacrum. When he comes into play, you get a basic land from your deck tapped, which is honestly already amazing. I love this boy. But when he dies, you can draw a card. Doomed Traveler, Doomed Dissenter, and Hunted Witness are all basically different flavors of the same effect, because whenever one of these guys dies, they get replaced by a creature token. Carrier Thrall also makes a token when it dies, except its token can generate mana by sacrificing itself, which is like 2 deaths on 1 card already. Hallowed Spirit Keeper replaces itself, but it's way better than those other losers because it makes tokens equal to the amount of creatures in your graveyard, and let me tell you, with enough corpses and Teysa on board, a dead Spirit Keeper can generate an army. Lastly, we have Revelark, and whenever this bad boy dies, you get up to 2 creatures with power 2 or less from your graveyard. Next, let's talk about the cards that care about things dying. Grim Haruspex and Harvester of Souls both draw you a card whenever another non-token creature dies, though Haruspex stipulates that it does have to be one of your creatures. Cheapskate. Skullclamp draws you 2 cards whenever the equipped creature dies, and it gives the creature it equips -1 toughness, which can sometimes mean you're paying 1 mana to draw 4 cards. Whenever another non-token creature dies, Ogre Slumlord gives you a rat. He also gives all of your rats Death Touch, which can really speed up the process of killing non-token creatures your opponents control. Athreos has an interesting death trigger, and by interesting, I mean he threatens to break the kneecaps of an opponent whenever a creature you control dies, unless they let you return it to your hand. Why yes, the pay 3 life effect does double up, thanks for asking. Are you gonna pay 6 life, or can I get my Doomed Traveler back? Pawn of Ulamog creates an Eldrazi spawn token that can be sacrificed for mana whenever it or another non-token creature you control dies. Pitiless Plunderer is like that, but infinitely better, because whenever any other creature you control dies, you get a treasure. Butcher of Malakir makes your opponents sacrifice creatures whenever it or another creature you control dies. Requiem Angel gives you a spirit token whenever another non-spirit creature you control dies, and then there's Mothra. No, it's not Luminous Broodmoth, it's Mothra. Pay attention. The Queen of the Monsters revives any creature you control that died, as long as they didn't have flying. Oh, and she gives them flying counters when she brings them back. Mothra's amazing. Then we have the heavy hitters in the death trigger category. Blood Artist and his backup dancers Falconwrath Noble, Cruel Celebrant, Zulaport Cutthroat, and Bastion of Remembrance. All of these cards have some variation of, whenever another creature dies, 1 or more opponents lose a life and you gain a life. Having enough of these turns any creature death into an Al-Qaeda attack on your opponent's life total. Next up, we have to talk about getting all of these death triggers. You see, not every creature in this deck actually wants to die, so sometimes we have to perform a bit of assisted suicide in the form of sacrifice outlets. First up, we have the Fleshbag Marauder. He doesn't just give us a death trigger, he helps our opponents by giving each of them a death trigger too. Isn't that helpful? Cartel Aristocrat and Nantaku Husk both sacrifice other creatures to help them out. Aristocrat gives herself protection from a color for the turn, and the Husk gains +2/+2 for each creature he vores. Viscera Seer and Woe Strider each allow you to dismember another creature you control to scry the top card of your deck. Honestly, a fair trade-off if you think about it. Woe Strider even enters play with his first victim and can escape the underworld. Plumb the Forbidden and Altar's Reap take this a step further and allow you to sacrifice creatures to draw cards. Imagine sacrificing Sad Robot with Skull Clamp equipped to Altar's Reap. It's like winning the lottery. Diabolic Intent and Sidisi Undead Vizier can both sacrifice a creature to act as a tutor, with Sidisi even providing the creature. Yeah, sure, she's a 4/6 with Death Touch, but I assure you, combat is a non-factor here. Both Bone Splinters and Spark Harvest let you sacrifice a creature to blow up one of your opponent's creatures, or, in Spark Harvest's case, even a Planeswalker. And by this point in the video, you're probably asking, hey Loreseeker, why do all the cards have little white corners on them? Well, Carl, it's because manually editing those out takes time, and honestly, I just didn't feel like it today, so stop asking questions. Anyway, Ashnod's Altar is basically one of the best sacrifice outlets because it lets you turn your lazy, unproductive creatures into pure mana, which is honestly just a great trade-off. And if you really need something you control to die and you don't have anything else, there's High Market, which lets you convert a creature into life, which isn't that great, but when life gives you lemons, kill that lemon for life with High Market. Then we have a bunch of cards that either don't do things when they die, or don't do a thing when something else dies, or don't help you kill your own creatures, but honestly, they're so good I couldn't help but run them in the deck anyway. First up, there's Kamiya False Hope, who will gladly seppuku himself to prevent all combat damage for a turn, and you'd think this isn't as good as Spore Frog, but when you combine this spirit with Mothra or Athreos, he's gonna have a hard time resting in peace. Then we get all the cool kill spells that Orzhov has access to, like Path to Exile, Swords to Plowshares, Fracture, and Anguished Unmaking. Oubliette isn't really a kill spell, but it can put an opponent's commander in gay baby jail for the entire game if they don't have enchantment removal, and honestly, that's just as good. Reanimate is basically the only reanimation spell in the entire deck because honestly, if you really didn't want one of your creatures to be in the graveyard, you wouldn't be playing this deck, but sometimes bringing back an opponent's Craterhoof is too good to pass up. Then we have Damn, which is either targeted removal or a Wrath effect, and in this deck, you don't care too much about board wipes because when you've got enough death triggers on board, a Wrath effect can basically just be game over for your opponents. Damnable Pact, Phyrexian Arena, and Mentor of the Meek are here because this is still a white deck, and that means I am insecure about my draw power. Please stop bringing it up. Let's move on to the best creature in the game. Reassembling Skeleton is the gift that keeps on giving. You can pay 2 mana at any time to bring him back from the grave, just to sacrifice him for some other effect. Honestly, this Skelly Boa should be mythic, because he's won me so many games just by being there. He puts in so much work. I run Grim Tutor and Demonic Tutor in addition to the tutor spells from earlier, because card selection is no joke. And yes, I know it's a revised tutor, but really, I have a beta one. No, you can't see it, I keep it at home, I'm not on trial here. Smothering Tithe and Land Tax are amazing, and every white deck should run them. No, this is not optional. Lightning Greaves and Swiftfoot Boots both do the same thing in this deck, and while you'd think it's providing Teysa with some protection from opponent's spells, actually they're just here to cover up her feet so the weird perverts I play with don't get distracted. I run Ghostly Prison because I think it's funny that my opponent has to pay 2 mana to attack into a creature I want to die anyway, and then there's Divine Visitation. This deck makes quite a few tokens, and Divine Visitation turns those tokens into angels, and I mean, honestly, is there anything better than a holy harem? No, I don't think so. Speaking of harem, we have 4 beautiful ladies to round out the last of these cards. First up is Magister of Worth, and I'm not going to read this effect because it brings actual politics to the table, and you should keep politics out of card games, but trust me when I say she's cool as hell. Then we have Elspeth and Elesh Norn, and it's cool that I'm making this video after reading A Garden of Flesh because these two are definitely going to have a sexy catfight in the future, and I'm looking forward to that. Elesh Norn gives all of your creatures a power-up and all of your opponent's creatures scoliosis. Elspeth, Sun's Champion, has 3 different loyalty abilities, but we're never using that ultimate, so instead focus on the fact that she can give birth to 3 sacrifice targets per turn, or she can Thanos snap everything with power 4 or greater. And then we have Avacyn, and she's literally just in this deck so that I can tell that one guy from Discord that I'm playing with his waifu. Sure, she's powerful, but nothing's more powerful than NTR. Now, a lot of these cards cost quite a bit of mana, so we should probably be spending the first few turns ramping, and for that we have Sol Ring, Commander's Sphere, Orzhov's Signet, Gilded Lotus, and Thran Dynamo. Honestly, I should probably run Arcane Signet in here, so I'm gonna go ahead and make that change at some point. Now, this would be the part of the video where I share my lands, and while I do play Marsh Flats and Godless Shrine, I couldn't help but notice while writing this script that I don't actually have a Reliquary Tower in the deck, despite all the cool card draw effects I run, and I've been playing this deck for almost 3 years now, and not having Reliquary Tower actually kind of makes me feel like an idiot, and feeling like an idiot makes me feel depressed, and feeling depressed makes me feel like, you know, Teysa, put me out of my misery. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and if you do, please violate those like and subscribe buttons and turn on notifications because I do try to make these video things. This video is brought to you by my amazing patrons who keep me above the poverty line with their donations. If you want to help me pay off my Mafia debt, head over to Patreon and consider supporting me. I'd actually appreciate it. And finally, this video was inspired by my good friend Dice Try. Right now, there should be a new video discussing white-black color philosophy over on his channel, and if you don't go watch it, I'm going to find where you live.